Welcome to part 2 from Westeros.org, discussing the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and today we'll be discussing the second story, The Sworn Sword.
So just like last time, we'll discuss a little bit of the history of this particular story, the Sworn Sword. As we discussed last time with the Hedge Knight came out when George had been kind of working on the Clash of Kings and so on, and it was clear that certain ideas, like the Blackfires, didn't exist when he wrote it. It was only later that he kind of came up with it. And as we mentioned then, we had notes from George around 98, 99, which were the first ones that actually post the Hedge Knight.
Right, yeah.
But before the Storm of Swords, where he was starting to actually come up with all these ideas. And in the Sworn Sword, which was published in Legends 2, which was the follow-up, because it was such a successful book for Tor, that Robert Silverberg did another one. The Sworn Sword was a story that came out after Storm of Swords, and by that point, all of that is fully developed. The whole Blackfire business is there in great detail. Bloodraven is there. And now this is interesting. We'll save it for the Mystery Night, but it's interesting because of some stuff that we've gotten from George from interviews about the Targaryens and people like Bloodraven. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. Published in 2003. So I think Storm of Swords came out in 2001 or 2000.
2000, I think.
Yeah, so it was... So, he was working on A Feast for Crows, basically, and that's before he split it into two. So...
and by this time, George was definitely one of the big draws of Legends too.
Yes.
There was quite a difference from the first Legends anthology.
Robert Jordan then. And...
so he might have been the top billing, I think, for it. Certainly one of the more...
notable by that point,
Notable and most anticipated stories.
Now, this story I love it because it's such a very different scale.
Oh, yeah.
The Hedge Knight I love that one as well. But the Sworn Sword is the first one that really digs into things that I think start to become important in A Song of Ice and Fire, which is sort of the lower level of conflict and politics and...
I mean, it's not strange that it comes out when he's working on A Feast for Crows.
Indeed.
There are parallels to looking at sort of the smaller scale, the concerns of the smaller lords, the concerns of the small folk, and I know that, the title had people speculating all sorts of things, who was Dunk going to be a sworn sword to, and, there were thoughts that maybe he would already be, deep in, again, royal politics and being a sworn sword to, was Egg back in, King's Landing, and was he a sworn sword to him? Something like that. And it turns out that no, he's still very much a Hedge Knight and very much living the life of a Hedge Knight together with Egg.
What I wrote down here was actually that the level of political affairs we see is not unlike what Bran sees in the Clash of Kings during the Harvest Hall, where various lords come with various petty issues and, having to deal with, the fellow who insists that there's going to be a fine summer or spirit summer, and so they don't have to store so much. And so it's that kind of level of politics, and it's set against the background of a troubled realm that has suffered a great deal. But let's actually follow up that with discussing Dunk and what happens to him after the Hedge Knight, leading to this point. The main thing we get from the story about Dunk is he went to Dorne looking for Cancely, and
seems like they chased down quite a few troops of puppeteers and weren't able to find her. I thought for a moment when I reread it, is she actually supposed to be dead and such? There was something there that was suggesting the way he was thinking about her, but no, it's clear that he just did not find her again. And how long they spent in Dorne is unclear, but they traveled around quite a bit.
Went to the Planky Town, saw the orphans on the Green Blood. There's a reference to Mad Lady Vaith, who they ran into.
And that's an interesting one in that, at that point, would anyone else have gotten it?
We were, we knew
Yes.
when we read it because we had those notes from George, and George's notes included, I mean, they were initially his initial notes for the Mistresses of Aegon, the Unworthy, and they included Casella Vaith. So we knew then.
Well, we think that that's her anyway.
It seems pretty clear that she's probably.
It seems likely from the information that he expanded on for the Mistresses for the World of Ice and Fire. We know that Casella, even though, Aegon was willing to eventually, give her up to be executed along with the other hostages, she was still convinced that he loved her and returned to Dorne with the other hostages. One presumes that she wasn't particularly popular in Dorne on her return.
She was, I mean, we get the impression of someone who's mentally fragile.
Yes,
and so cracked a bit. So
it wouldn't be a surprise if she was indeed.
And of course, the death of Chestnut happens there, which is it's a really nicely written a dream of Chestnut dying in the Boneway, I believe, and
Doug wants to bury her.
But he wanted to bury her, and the knights were telling kindly, not unkindly, was interested in the Dornish knights saying, "Look, leave it for the sand dogs." That's
obviously his dream turns it into quite a nightmarish sequence. But then when
he has a lot of odd dreams, actually. I mean.
He has some really odd dreams. He has an active imagination, I would say.
Yeah. But, so they come back from Dorne, and, of course, being in Dorne was something of a blessing, because the Great Spring Sickness hit, and Dorne was one of the places that was safe from it, because the Prince of Dorne...
Shut down the Planky Town.
Shut down, the closed down passes and things, and made it so that they could...
yes, because it clearly killed off quite a few people. I mean, I like how it's referenced several times in the story, how they talk about those who died. They died in the spring.
Yeah, no.
It's you're not really talking directly about it. You're sort of skirting around it.
Yeah.
And they died in the spring.
I mean, obviously they went on from Dorne to Old Town. Actually, we hear a reference of Egg's brother Aemon, the future Maester Aemon, who ended up measuring Dunk's height. I think he was 6'11" at that time, and had room to grow still. And I think that's where they acquired the donkey or mule Maester. Yeah.
Yes.
Very cute. But so the Great Spring Sickness hits, and it's devastating. King's Landing in particular is very hard hit. You lose Daeron the Good, you lose Valar the young prince, you lose Mataris the even younger prince, the High Septon, the Hand, many of the Silent Sisters who were tending to the ill. Bloodraven, we're told, is the one who says, we can't bury these, we have to burn them and get rid of these bodies as quickly as possible, the disease that comes with it. At the same time, shortly after, there's a drought that besets the realm, and this is summer, and it's very dry. And that's actually a very important point for this particular story, because the lack of water makes access to water so important. The Checky water is...
certainly having a quarrel about water is quite realistic. I mean, it's sort of thing, having access to watering holes, having access to rivers and such would have been a point of contention. Whose land is it on, and are you supposed to have access to it, and, where's the source of the water and all of that.
And to add everything else on top of that, you've got the raids by Dagmer Greyjoys, Ironborn on the western coast. They are just reaving again. The World of Ice and Fire expands a bit on that, I think, and it's just so actually when Dunk and Egg are coming back to Sandfast, they've come back from a place that has been recently raided, Dosk and Little Dosk, which actually helps, I think, localize the story a bit, because if it's close enough to be raided by Ironborn, it has to be not that far from the coast or the river. They can travel on the rivers, but it's not like deep in the eastern reach. It must be out in the western regions. Certainly supported by the fact that the liege lord for both of them is Lord Rowan of Golden Grove, which is sort of in the sort of northwestern or western reach area.
I mean, here we also see some of the sort of the tiered structure of, they answer to Lord Rowan, who then, answers
at the same
Lord
time.
Lannister,
I mean, Golden Grove is fairly inland itself, right? So one of the things I point out to people, and this is one of the examples of it, is George doesn't, just like in real history, lords and greater lords have vassals in non-contiguous areas. You don't necessarily, or you don't have as big state-like, nation-like plot of land, and all your vassals are in it, and they're all bordering one another. It's entirely possible that through time, your lands have grown and shrunk. You've acquired through marriages, this and that and the other, and now your vassals are quite spread out. Or, a king grants you the vassalage of these lords over here, and suddenly you
get some village here, you get some village there.
Yeah.
I mean, we see a little bit because they end up looking at maps of ownership and deeds of ownership of land in the story when they're disputing who exactly does the Cheeky Water belong to.
Indeed, and I mean, obviously, Coldmoat, as Eustace Osgrey reveals, it used to be an Osgrey castle. They used to own all sorts of stuff. And then they started losing it. So it's full of, the landscape is full of history, and it's full of the complications of
and
history.
The story relies a lot on things that have happened in the past. In further back, to go back, on, the Ospreys having been a greater house further back and having gradually lost power, and then more recent things like the Spring Sickness and also the Blackfire Rebellion, which really drives a lot of what happens
in the story. In the last element, this is not there's dissatisfaction of the king, and in particular with the king's hand. So let's actually move on to discussing Aerys the First, the bookish king, and Bloodraven. This is the first time that we actually hear of Bloodraven at all. He's not in the Hedge Knight. He's not mentioned a Storm of Swords as such. Doug saw him in King's Landing, and it's very clear to me. It's a bit of a homage to Elric. His appearance, this long skin, sitting tall in a saddle, long pale hair, albino with his black sword, dark sister. It's very much an Elric kind of thing.
And he's got his lover is his half sister.
Yeah.
Elric has his cousin.
Yeah.
So
and I think the story also mentions Shira, doesn't it? Because Egg is concerned about his. He talks about how Shira is a sorceress who uses magic to keep herself young, and then wasn't it supposed to be his sister Ray who was supposed to give him some potion to try and make him fall in love with her? And there's some.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah. So there's all dissatisfaction. He's there's the 1,000 eyes in one. He lost an eye at the Redgrass Field to his half brother Bittersteel. They all have great names, really.
George really
came up with some great ones.
With some fabulous ones. I think the children of Aegon the Unworthy have landed some of the best by names.
Even to the point, the dissatisfaction. Even in court dissatisfaction. Egg refers to the fact that the High Septon told his father how bastard blood can't be trusted. It's quite clear that the High Septon is kind of indicating he's no fan of the hand, or at least.
And we're seeing.
Well, this has to be the High Septon who died, of course.
Yes, and we're seeing the problem going back to the Hedge Knight of the death of Baelor and Makers.
Yes,
it is brought up in the story several times that there are whispers about Maker having been purposefully responsible for killing Baelor, and it gets very frustrated when people talk about Maker sitting and brooding in Summerhall and not really
not getting along with people,
not getting along with people, not doing it. So basically,
and Bloodraven in particular,
it's all going back to that whole thing with Dunk's involvement, and if that wasn't the case, would Maker be at court? Would he do something to rein Bloodraven in? And
that's one of the interesting things, because this is one of the things where there seems to have been an evolution. When we worked on A World of Ice and Fire app, we'd had an entry for Maker or for Bloodraven or something. We're referring to the fact that when we learned that Bloodraven had been arrested and then sent to the wall, the impression then we had, and we sent these to George and he signed off on them, was that Maker was the one who put him there. And when it comes around to the World of Ice and Fire, the story is suddenly very different.
Indeed.
Which is the fact that, and people say, it doesn't make sense. George must have forgotten that they were quarreling. No, they were quarreling, but there's a long stretch of time between their quarreling and the time that Maker becomes king.
That's true.
There's a second failed Blackfire Rebellion.
He probably had plenty of time to see the usefulness.
Yes. So George, this is realistic. They may have had issues, especially when Bloodraven was at the height of his influence, and Maekar felt maybe cast aside. In part, and I think in part this has to do with the fact that Aerys, very bookish, constantly reading books of prophecy and weird things, failing to have children, which is a big concern of everybody.
Yeah, not just failing to have children, apparently failing to consummate his marriage.
Yes. He really wasn't interested at all. Sweden had a king like that, the one who...
Yes, the one who reputedly got some help, I think, from someone
who had to explain the mechanics of...
Yes, I guess they should have given Aerys a book on it, maybe? I don't know if that would have helped.
Yeah, so... and this is also where the queen... was it Eleanor or Elisania? Eleanor, I think.
I'm blanking on that one.
Yes, Eleanor, I think. She, of course, everyone would assume was a half-sister. And then our World Ice and Fire and George's Tree revealed that she is not. She is, in fact, a cousin of House Penrose, actually, which connects complicated methods to other parts of the Targaryen family tree. So anyways, there's all these little details where we thought we knew what was going on, and George kind of complicated and made it realistic, and it perfectly works, but it kind of changed the picture a bit.
That's true.
So the big concern of the realm then is also the fact that there's no heirs, and then who's left. I mean, Septon kind of runs through things again. You got Rhaegal is mad, and he runs through all the other problems all over the realm. I mean, Lord Tully is a boy because the last Lord Tully passed away in the spring. You've got trouble in the... are they talking about the trouble in the north about a Lord Stark dying? I think, or no? Is it the Mystery Knight that has that one?
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's the Mystery Knight. No, wait a second. No. Because then at the end of Sword and Sword, they're talking about going up to the wall.
That's true, but I don't.
They don't get there because then.
Recall them talking about the north. But I could be wrong.
Anyways, there's all sorts of weird stuff going on, and it's just not a great time for the realm.
And in particular, that sort of the specter of the rebellion is hanging over people.
Let's focus it down then on the immediate conflict we have, the two houses who are the main antagonists here, Osgrey and Weber, and then that'll lead us, I think, very naturally into the Blackfire Rebellion. Two houses, House Osgrey of Standfast, who used to rule Cold Moat, who, all these lands stretching out. The Chequy Lion, yes. Which is, we had Osgrey in our family from the heraldry long ago. That was George as one of the first, it was, I think, in the first or second batch of notes, of heraldry notes he sent us in 98 or 97 or whatever, long ago.
Whether he had any of these ideas or he just picked these houses because, he liked what he could do with them, where he thought they'd be placed and so on. I suspect that he just picked two names and decided that they were...
and then House Weber of Coldmoat with the Lady Weber, and whereas Osgrey is a landed knight who, they used to be the Wardens of the North March and the Gardner Kings who protected the northern borders against the Kingdom of the Rock.
They have the Little Lion as a famous ancestor.
Yeah. Little not because he was small, but because he was the youngest of, several strapping brothers, and was allegedly cut in half, more or less, by, obviously, Bright War is a story. Osgrey... Let me keep on Weber for a bit. Weber is in an interesting situation herself, because Rohane obviously is the Red Widow, and there's all this stuff about all these husbands and children who have died, and it's all sinister.
Starts painting up a very sinister image in his mind of this presumably older widow who can't be trusted at all. Of course, it turns out to be... Well, the can't be trusted is... somewhat true, but the rest...
is this misfortune?
Yes.
She married, her first husband was an old man, and she she just had bad luck.
Yeah. But she has an interesting legal situation to contend with. Her father did not have a male heir, so he has to leave it to her, but he wants her married. And so if she's not married by a certain time after his
2 years after his death,
after his death, it will pass to, is it a cousin or something, I think?
one of his cousins, yes.
So she has to marry. She has to find someone. So apparently it is entirely possible to make contracts like that and specify wills that regulate your inheritance. Because normally when he doesn't have any male heirs, it really should be hers. But I guess the inheritance of women is weakened enough that it is possible to...
Never really asked George the thinking, like, he's always said, like, of course, I mean, like, for example, The Rock is Cersei's. Kevin doesn't contest it, for example. No one contests the fact that she is the heir to Tywin Lannister.
But it may be, in particular, in a sort of troubled time after rebellion and such, it's possible for a person to push through a will where it would be unsuitable to have a woman leading it, especially without a husband.
I mean, he did stuff. He has... Her father had fought on the behalf of Daeron, and some of the stuff he won was because of his support. They won stuff from the Osgreys, the rights to the Sheki water.
So if there's another rebellion, he doesn't want her, perhaps, or the house to be in a situation where it's led by a woman and there's no strong man to...
And basically, I mean, I think it could also be the idea that, well, they owe me, so if she contests this, they'll support because I had supported them.
Yes.
I mean, so it's complicated because George's view...
It's not a usual situation, certainly.
No.
I don't think we see any other examples of something similar.
At the same time, I mean, you had this whole thing about, in the Middle Ages, about heiresses and women who were going to be heirs to lands, and it was important, but basically their husband married them, and the husbands basically became the lord. They were supposed to run things. George has, just as in the Middle Ages, there were actually women who were heiresses who ended up, even if they got married, they were still the ones, with the pants on, who were actually making the decisions. It's clear that exists, but it seems more likely that if an heiress is around, in many cases, it's her husband who's going to be taking precedence. That, he knows more and has more experience, and it's a very patriarchal society.
We see that if you look at the situation with Sam in the books, Lord Tarly can't simply pass him over, even for another child. That seems to be, he basically has to get him out of the way somehow.
Now, there, you look at it in the perspective of, okay, he's Mace's buddy, right? But then this could go to the king, and, well, Mace and he fought against Robert, so they can't necessarily expect...
But it may be something to be said for the fact that the rights of a son are more...
Certainly.
It's harder to dispossess a son than a daughter.
It's probably true. I think a daughter can be dispossessed.
You can bring up the whole unsuitability thing, that it's not suitable to have a woman running the household on her own.
Or in certain situations, certainly, that it doesn't make sense. So she has a really complicated situation, and she has all these suitors interested in her. She has, and then one of them, what she doesn't want at all, is Lucas Inchfield, the Long Inch. Is very tall fellow, but not as tall as Dunk, which seems to annoy him. Sort of captain of a guard, or was he master of arms? One of the other at Cold Mode, who at some point, was fighting off potential suitors, or made it clear that he would kill off anyone who seemed likely to win her hand. Like challenge. There's a whole thing about challenges to duels. Like, can you just be an ass and say, I duel you because I want to.
Yeah.
Or do you basically, I think probably what you do is you start insulting someone so much, right? Like, if they don't say face and challenge you, they'll be a coward, and then it's like, it can't be considered.
And then, of course, it is mentioned even here, a little note there, which we followed up, or which George followed up in The World of Ice and Fire, that she's had a few letters from Gerald Lannister.
Yes, very charming, the younger brother of the Lord Lannister, because another one who died in the spring was the Grey Lion, Daemon Lannister. He died, so it's Tybalt who's Lord. And Gerald has indicated interest in marrying Rohanne, but it's, I think, Sefton says, coming to this little castle out in the Reach doesn't have half as much as interest as, staying at his brother's court at Casterly Rock and all the entertainments and frolics there. So, and then, of course, we find out that, after Gerald becomes Lord, he ends up marrying Rohanne Webber, which is complicated.
Not his first wife, right?
Not his first wife. but ends up marrying her, and she is, you know, that was the biggest surprise that we teased it, that, you know, she is the grandmother of Tywin Lannister, great grandmother of Tywin's kids. I mean,
and she disappears.
Yeah. What is up with that one?
I have no idea.
I suspect it's a future Duncan Egg story.
May very well be, but to return to this one.
Yeah, let's actually then go over to the Osgreys. Eustace Osgrey, I find him a very sympathetic figure. In a way, he's a fool, but he's full of romanticism. He romanticizes everything that happened. The past of the Osgreys, their greatness.
I mean, he's very much stuck on it.
Yes, he's a man who he's lost everything, and
he lost his sons in the rebellion. He keeps visiting,
and his daughter in the spring.
So he keeps visiting their graves.
His wife killed herself when she saw that all her sons were dead. He's lost everything, so he's stuck in the past.
That's interesting. That's another one where they use a bit of a euphemism. He, you know, goes down to the Blackberry Patch to see his sons.
Yeah,
he doesn't talk about visiting their graves. He's visiting his sons in the Blackberry Patch where they were buried.
It's beautiful, but and he is the one who kind of, in a way, misleads Dunk about the situation. He keeps insisting that there's hours in. And then you have Brown Bennis, one of the other unsavory sworn sword. Well, the unsavory sworn sword he has, who is brown and clothing, brown shield, brown teeth. I think it's all from the red leaf that he chews, or sour leaf. And cutting one of her, you know, when they discover his dam is going up, that's going to divert the water to defend Coldmoat and to provide them more control or an access to the water for irrigating fields and so on. Bennis cuts one of the men, and then Osgrey gets this crazy notion of, you know, well, I'll pay a blood price like they used to do back in the day. Blood price for those, you know, the Were Guild in the Anglo-Saxon used to be the case in the early Middle Ages that you, like in Anglo-Saxon England, that you had lists of prices. If you injure a person, you pay this much. If you injure a slave, a woman, a child, up to this amount, and even killing, you could kill somebody and pay a hefty guilt. And this is not a fine to the state; it's a payment to the family to basically say, now I paid my debt to you. She, of course, dismisses it as ridiculous. It's not. They don't do that anymore. You don't. And she'd rather go fighting, because, as she says, I mean, her situation is such that she has to be twice as macho as any man to be able to convince people that she has the right to rule, because she's a woman.
A tiny woman.
And she's a tiny woman, yes, as well.
But Osgrey, he is, I mean, again, I reread this story recently and before the publication here, and it's really very a sad portrait of this the man who just keeps thinking about the past, and then when, you know, you kind of start sensing that there's something up, and eventually in the middle of the story, you find out that the reason that, I mean, Dunk goes to see Lady Webber, and from her finds out that, well, Osgrey lost lands and lost access to the wellspring, basically, of the Chequy River, because he was on the wrong side in the rebellion. And they've talked about the rebellion several times, but the idea of
the black dragon or the red,
it's a dangerous question, as to say, asking someone, were you for the black dragon or were you for the red dragon? And Dunk kind of realizes, you know, he must have met lots of people. Half the realm was divided. Half the realm was for the black dragon. He must have met a lot of people who were for the black dragon, and they try not to talk about it, but in the situation, obviously, it's I
recall in particular, like at the early point, I mean, it's all obfuscated. And there's a bit where Osgrey kind of pulls out a question about, you know, who did, you know, Sir Arlen at the Redgrass Field, and well, yes, and he was serving under the hand. Was it Butterwell? No, it's not Butterwell. I know the name. I'm ashamed that I'm forgetting it. Anyway, their hand was killed at Redgrass Field, and Osgrey said, he was a noted loyalist, and I think it's in italicized, like he's like putting a little emphasis on it, and you can maybe start saying, he doesn't necessarily, Dunk misses it, but he doesn't necessarily, that's not necessarily praise. that he was a loyalist. So you start maybe getting an inkling. And so the whole thing about it is that Lord Webber and Eustace used to be great friends, close friends. His son squired for him. There were
His
plans.
son was supposed to marry
Rohain, everything. And then he picked the wrong side.
Yeah.
And everything follows from that all the way to this conflict. So let's actually, I guess, get into the Blackfire Rebellion. The Blackfire Rebellion. Now I remembered, after a quick look to refresh my memory, it's Lord Hayford.
You didn't remember.
I as soon as I said that's what it was, because I remembered the arms, I couldn't remember the name. It was Hayford who was killed. Actually, is by Gorman Peake, who we'll meet in the next story. He also killed Roger of Pettytree, Arlen's nephew, who was his squire, who leads to Duncan becoming the squire.
Which becomes an interesting point in the next story. So George really decides to
weaving a lot of stuff like that. So the Blackfire Rebellion is the first Blackfire Rebellion we're talking about here. It is Daemon Blackfire, the illegitimate son of Aegon the Unworthy and Diana Targaryen, Diana the Defiant, daughter of Aegon III, the sister to the young dragon, to Baelor the Blessed, who had her rights, but had the realm not decided that women could not inherit, she would have been the queen of 7 kingdoms. I mean, there
is even a brief time after the death of Baelor where there is some discussion about whether she should be the one inheriting. So, but she and her 2 sisters were placed in the Maiden Vault by Baelor because he didn't want her beauty to tempt men. I mean, he was married to Diana, but then decided to. He never consummated the marriage, and then he dissolved the marriage and became a septon. Diana did not particularly appreciate being locked up. She made a few escapes over the year.
And on one occasion.
And at least one of them was with the help of her cousin Aegon. And apparently, while they were out, they had a good time because she turns out pregnant and initially refuses to name the father. But he comes out looking very Targaryen.
Yes, Daemon Waters, who would later take the name Blackfire when he is knighted at the age of 13, was it?
13 or 14.
13 years old by his father, and given the sword Blackfire, the sword of kings. And so he takes the name Blackfire. Yeah. And his arms are the black dragon on red, or the standard reversing of the arms. And that is a really important detail, the fact that he gets Blackfire. And the fact that he has such prowess at such a young age. He is a great knight. He is perhaps the greatest knight in the realm. And perhaps if you want to believe Eustace Osgrey, he was the greatest warrior who ever lived.
Yeah, he runs through a few names that he compares him with, including his uncle.
The Dragon Knight.
The Dragon Knight.
The noblest knight who ever lived. Ulrich Dane, the Sword of the Morning.
We don't know where he's placed at all. That's been a source of some
He must have been... he either is the contemporary Sword of the Morning or he was a previous Sword of the Morning, but I think he would have been in the lifetime of Eustace.
Yes.
I don't think he would have been... Or maybe in the generation before. I don't think this is someone from the far distant past.
No, probably not.
So... He is this great warrior. He looks... I mean, George described him to the artist when he was discussing like how he should look.
Isn't he described to be sort of Aegon the Conqueror?
Come again a little bit. But also he said like he said like you should think of him like Marvel's Thor from the comics. And when George says that, he's thinking of the classic era. People like George Perez and people who are...
Is that without a winged helmet?
Without the winged helmet, or it might have dragon wings, I suppose. Okay. But you're talking long silver blonde hair, tall strappings, broad shoulders, probably a bit square jawed. He was just this manly man, and everyone could tell he was this great warrior. Yeah. And he has a sword, and is a sword a sign that Aegon thinks he should be king? Because the whole thing is Aegon and Daeron the Good, did not get along. Aegon the Unworthy did not like Daeron the Good. What big surprise. Yeah. They didn't get along, they didn't see an eye to eye.
I mean, Daeron had a lot of his mother Aerys in him quite clearly. Who Aerys was a very pious, kind, rather timid woman.
I would say Daemon is timid, but he wasn't a warrior.
But I mean, I think he had a lot of her sort of sensibilities, probably, maybe not as pious, but he clearly wasn't to Aegon's liking at all. Even so much that at some point it appears he starts spreading the rumor that Daeron was in fact not his son, but the son of Aemon.
I mean, he was threatening at him, I'm going to name Daemon my heir instead of you. And of course, on his deathbed, he does one of the worst things that a Targaryen king has ever done, which is legitimize all his children. All of them. And we don't really hear about most of them, but the great bastards, those of by noble mothers, in particular Daemon, that's important because now, George has always said, he said way back, there's a bit of a gray area in Westerosi law about inheritance in relation to bastards. Like, if you legitimize a bastard, does he then go into his birth order, or does he go at the end of a line after the
because he's in fact older.
He's not older than Daemon. That's the thing. It is, of course, the thing. He's not older. No. But on the other hand, and in fact, I don't think he's older than either Bittersteel or Bloodraven. I don't believe so. So, in fact,
that's true.
It's the fact that he has the double Targaryen that makes him purer and nearer to the line than them.
Yeah.
And then there's just this whole...
Because, technically, it may also go back on the whole thing that Diana had a better claim than Aegon.
Yeah, in a way.
So he's going back to an earlier generation.
As well. There's the fact that he ties up to both of them that kind of does it. So anyways, it's a really complicated situation where you have him and you have people starting to get upset because Daemon gets the throne and he's a good king, but he's a good king because he brings peace and plenty, but this entails things like bringing Dorne into the realm, completing Baelor the Blessed's efforts to kind of end this repeated conflict with Dorne, this wasteful thing that really didn't make sense for either of them to keep fighting. Which
Aegon the Unworthy had tried to restart, by the way,
because his son...
crazy expedition with built dragons and...
Which didn't work very well.
Yeah, it didn't work very well.
But that's because, at the same time, his son is married to a princess of Dorne. He didn't have a choice in it. Baelor arranged that. So you have this really messy situation, and Eustace Osgrey he's our main picture of what's going on politically. He talks about how Daeron with a little pot belly that shook when he laughed, and he was surrounded by books and singers and Dornishmen. Dornish women and Dornish men were filling his court, and so you get certainly the impression when you look at all the list of the people who kind of support Daemon. Daemon didn't really have support of any of the great houses. It's lesser houses in general, and in particular, there seemed to be a good deal of houses from like the Reach and the West, and places where you might imagine people might have, in particular the Reach, like the Marchers
have a beef to pick with Dorne. And also in lesser houses have less to risk and more to win.
Yeah.
If they come out on top and supporting the winning side, they have a chance to move up in the world.
Yeah, so Daemon attracted all these heroes, as according to Robb Rain and Fireball in particular. He focuses on him a lot because he was the guy who was Aegon's master at arms, who should have been the Kingsguard Knight, who trained, Baelor and Daemon and all these people with this great knight.
Not a nice guy.
Not a nice guy at all.
He was so certain that he was going to be named the Kingsguard that he ended up putting his wife aside, forcing her to join the Silent Sisters, and then he didn't get named the Kingsguard.
Yeah, that didn't work so well for him. So you have Eustace's position, but it's all about...
you can see why Eustace would go with Daemon.
Yes.
He's thinking about the lost glories of the Osgreys, and he definitely wants to move up in the world again, reclaim some of the lost glory. And, he's so stuck on the romanticism of the past. And here we've got this legendary warrior, as he sees it.
Who is a leader, a born leader, who is a great warrior who you just can't be denied, but he should be king just because he's so amazing.
Yeah.
Compared to his half-brother who... And he calls him Daeron Falseborn. He transmits the claim that But he is not actually Aegon's son. He was Aemon the Dragon Knight's son.
Which is kind of weird because, you imagine that the guy who's not a good warrior at all is the son of the martial one of the brothers. I mean, Aegon was a competent fighter, but nothing at all to compare with his brother. So you're imagining that somehow that combination would turn out the worst results.
Yeah. My view, I've seen discussions, and there's been on our forums about like the politics of like who was in the right. And like for me, it seemed very obvious that Daeron was the one who was in the right. But
no, I think it's hard to contest that. Yes, Aegon may have... I think Aegon wasn't intending to disinherit anyone. He was just intending to cause as much trouble as possible, which he succeeded very well in. But, it ended up being a very complicated situation, and it was complicated further by the fact that Daemon, wasn't alone of the great bastards. He then had his half-brother Bittersteel on his side, whereas Bloodraven was on the other side, and how much that had to do with their own conflict over Shera Seastar, so that I think it may have been that Bloodraven picked sides first, perhaps, and Bittersteel would automatically be on the opposing side.
Yes, I think, and obviously, Bloodraven's mother was Blackwood, and Bittersteel's is a Bracken.
Yes.
And that's also a part of it.
That wasn't a good start to those two getting along.
No. They were never going to really get along.
I mean, the mother's, Bloodraven's mother unseated Bittersteel's mother as mistress of Aegon, and then her sister ended up being the one who was executed as well.
Yes.
So the Brackens kind of had a few beefs to pick with the whole situation, and by Bittersteel's name, you can kind of hear he wasn't really a happy, fun guy.
Bitter his steel and bitter his tongue, as I think is how he had it in the World of Ice and Fire. He was he and Fireball were clearly indicating the World of Ice and Fire to be kind of key people who pushed Daemon. Like Daemon, here's the thing. I mean, one of the things that Eustace holds out is, and then when Daemon married his sweet sister to the Prince of Dorne, everyone knew that but they loved one another. And the fact is that Daemon was already married, right?
Yeah,
and
he
has a bunch of kids. Yeah, and the World of Ice and Fire touches on it, of how basically, the marriage with Tyroshi girl was arranged by Aegon, but then it was completed after Aegon died. And then he has like 7 kids or something. I mean, it's a very fruitful marriage. And like, how did he, like, there's nothing that says anything really, but she loved him, or that he loved her.
She's a lot younger.
I think they're actually not that dissimilar. No. It's the fact that Daemon is quite a bit older than Daemon, but they're actually not that far apart. But the main thing is the fact that if he's married, how does it work? And so there's some speculation that maybe he thought, he could set aside his wife, despite the fact that she's giving him a bunch of kids, or maybe it's, or she was going to give him a bunch of kids, or maybe it's that he actually believed he could get away with having 2 wives, and that his father kind of said, okay, we'll do that. And
Isn't that an odd one? I just realized with this story, isn't his wife a Rohirrim as well?
She does. Well, I forget if George used it. Well, I don't recall if George in the World of Fire, if the family tree says Rohirrim. I would have to look, because I think it's still Rohirrim, and it's just a coincidence, I guess.
No, obviously, it's just kind of funny.
It is funny, but so you have all this stuff being held against Daemon, and that this is supposed to have led to why Daemon. Like, why did Daemon rebel?
Eustace tried to portray it as, Daemon wasn't really, some super ambitious guy. He was more sort of pushed into it by.
Well, Eustace doesn't do that. Eustace thinks that he's pushed into it by the things that Daemon was doing.
It's sort of like, it's not like he went out with no provocation to try and just grab the throne from his half-brother.
Whereas on the other hand, as the World of Ice and Fire shows, and as you can kind of get the hint, I mean, Daemon treated him well. But he didn't treat him so well. He was at the same time with the, like, I'm treating you well because I want to be your friend, but don't get ideas, right?
But the thing is, you really shouldn't name your children your Targaryen children daemon, because then you get ambitious bastards.
Yeah, well,
As the last one showed, and I think there's some similarity between the two.
yeah,
They're
there's
obviously
some.
descendants and-
So what we get is the fact that Daemon is, as people get disaffected by whatever they're disaffected by, the lack of martial glory and prowess being favored at court, too many Dornish at court.
It's kind of the Alexander the Great situation to some extent.
That's not a great situation. Yeah, you get people flocking around him and pushing him and whispering in his ear, like, you really make a better king. And to the point where in the World of Fire it says, Daemon was going to have him kind of detained to try and prevent, because he was hearing whispers that he was preparing to announce as king, and he wanted to stop it before it's put by our historian that Daemon's intent was to stop him before it got to that point, before he kind of took this irrevocable step. But Fireball found out and rescued and pulled him out of it and got him out of it, and that was used as the provocation. Now, you can question, maybe Daemon, and maybe this is the nice version of history, that he was going to just kind of stop him and say, look, you gotta chill out about this before you do something we can't revoke. Or maybe you want to take the more cynical view, but he was planning to, send him to the wall or exile him or kill him or something.
Yeah.
I really don't think so. I mean, to me, when I look at it, it's like Daemon has done everything he possibly could.
Well, if we look at later examples, if Daemon was taking the advice of Bloodraven, we see how Bloodraven acts with a later pretender, one of his sons. He would probably have gone for the idea of, let's lock him up somewhere
as a honored guest,
yes.
but safely,
because killing someone that's a bad idea. Then you
and so this leads to the Blackfire Rebellion. It's lots of battles, the half the realm fighting against the other half, and Daemon has a great deal of success, marching all the way practically to the doorstep of King's Landing to the red grass field, in which he and his eldest sons are killed. Yes, Breeze. We'll finish this section and take a pause. And there's Bloodraven, his Raven's teeth, his archers killed them, and maybe Bloodraven personally, his magic
and Eustace claims that it had a lot to do with Fireball being killed.
Fireball being killed early. He lists all these various things, people who
which
betrayed
I'm
them.
suspicious about, by the way, because.
Well, let's save that for the mystery night. But all these details that lead into why they lost, and one of the things I point out is like the Stormlords backed came in with Baelor Breakspear. They themselves allegedly would have had issues with the Dornish, and yet they stuck by the king.
They did not come in with Baelor Breakspear, I hope.
Yes, at the Red Field. Yes, the Baelor Breakspear, the hammer and the anvil, Maekar and Baelor.
Yes, of course.
Baelor leads in.
I'm completely confused about the timeline there.
Stormlords and Dornishmen, or is it the other one? Is it Maekar who has the Stormlords? Anyways, they're defeated. It's it was close, but they're defeated. With that, Reese says we really need to give him a little walk in the evening now food. Yes. So we'll be back after this. We have all this background. We have all this up, kind of setting the scene for the conflict.
There's a lot of setup, a lot of big events, and then this very small scale conflict.
And it's all
so the backstory is on an epic scale, whereas the story itself is, ultimately it's fairly prosaic, and so is the resolution that it comes to.
No, it's Eustace sends Dunk as his emissary to Coldmoat and learns, and then Dunk learns the truth that Eustace supported Blackfire, and also he brought all this on himself, and he said, "I'm not gonna pay money, but if he hands over Bennis to me, then fine." I mean, he obviously one of the things I forgot is Eustace's whole the Osgrey contingent lost a lot of people. It was him and I think 3 common men who returned from 30, 40, 50, including all the sons. His sons were dead. And one of the guys who he keeps praising was this wonderful forager who kept them fed as they made their way back. Well, this forager was also something of a cattle rustler and sheep rustler because he was executed when he got caught stealing from Lady Weber. Yeah. And obviously Eustace kind of holds it against her for executing his man and who had served him so faithfully. But so she wants Bennis, and he, out of a sense of honor and duty to his sworn man, even though Bennis is a terrible person, he says no, and he starts collecting his soldiers, such as they are, a handful of villagers, very simple, common men. I mean, they don't even have a proper sept. They have a septon at the sept.
Oh no, they have a guy who once visited Old Town.
Once visited Old Town to lead them in prayer, and then I think once every half year or so, a wandering septon comes by to kind of make marriages and baptize
I just
children.
love that idea that he visited Old Town once, so he's qualified.
Yeah, well, he's the holiest person they know because he was kind of close to the Starry Sept once. I mean, and it's a handful of guys, and there's a whole funny thing about how there's a bunch of Watts, and they kind of with similar names. So they like, what's your village grows? They Watt melons and barley corn. Actually, funnily enough, if in A Dance with Dragons, one of the men on the wall, I think he is a steward who's leading John through the supplies, is named Barleycorn, and one wonders if he was actually a descendant of this fellow.
Barleycorn, yes.
Yeah. And they even then they have too many Watts. They have 2 Watts from the same village, so then there's a Wet Watt who kind of gets sold.
Yeah.
And then they have Trebuchet, who's known for throwing, because he's good at throwing rocks.
Yeah.
And it's hopeless, right?
Yeah.
But then there's a spark that kind of, a literal spark, but the dryness of the drought has led Watts Wood to set alight, and Watts Wood is another kind of point of contention, and Eustace is certain that Rohane set it alight as part of her comment. What do you think? She denies it.
Well, she denies, purposefully doing it on her own or something. At least that I didn't. But if somebody,
maybe it's a little.
I don't think she should be trusted further than she can be thrown. Which, admittedly,
it's pretty far. She's really tiny, but
yes, but she's not very trustworthy.
It's possible that, or if she herself didn't necessarily do it, she kind of knew some of her men did it, and she doesn't necessarily mind so much.
She might not have ordered it, but said, it would be unfortunate if in this drought the wood caught fire.
Yeah, so they go out to meet, and Dunk thinks he has a solution, which involves a ring, the signet ring of Maekar Targaryen, which he entrusted was entrusted to Egg by his father. And he keeps it hidden in his toe of his boot,
yes,
I think.
So Egg keeps asking if they should use the boot whenever they're in trouble.
And Dunk decides to show the ring to Rohane and says, "This is Prince Aegon Targaryen, and if he dies, if he's harmed because of your conflict, you're in big trouble." But she has the problem. She has to resolve it. I mean, as you said, she has to be twice as macho. I mean, she rides out herself.
And when she kind of puts her foot down, she feels like she can't back down.
She can't back down.
She's got the long inch sort of holding things over her and just waiting to manage to get married to her and run the place himself. And it's quite clearly that he wants to be the lord. He wants to be calling the shots.
And that's where Dunk comes to a solution. Single combat to decide the matter, me against the long inch.
And I think by this time maybe Dunk has started to twig a little bit to just the fact that her ruthlessness can be used in that sort of way, that this will solve a problem for her. It's not. It's not particularly nice of her. Basically, she's hoping that he'll get killed.
Yeah, but
But it'll solve the situation.
It'll solve the situation. Yeah. He's a man who needs killing, I think so. Yeah. And Dunk kills him. He's still not a great sword, but
he's scrappy.
He's scrappy, and yet again he manages the feat of pulling the guy down and drowning him, and he himself nearly drowns as well.
Yeah.
He comes to pulls through thanks to the Maester at Coldmoat, who happens to actually be Ironborn by birth, and had studied what the Citadel had to say about what the drowned priests do when they drown and revive men, and so he obviously used the primitive sort of CPR techniques to get the water out of him and get him breathing again. And everything has changed. So Longinch is dead, and Rohane Webber and Eustace Greyjoy have married, solving Rohane's problem, solving Eustace's problem. They went down and they spoke, and she asked to see the sun in the briar patch, and then there they spoke and wept at their mutual losses and decided, well, let's marry.
Yes, and I mean that shows very much, I think, how. I mean, that's part of the reasoning. I don't necessarily trust her because she is. Maybe mercenary is too strong, but she's very much
pragmatic.
Very pragmatic. She's very pragmatic.
It's not like she's suddenly in love with this man who's old enough. I mean,
to be her great grandfather or something.
Great grandfather is a bit far, but I mean, certainly father. And honestly, grandfather wouldn't have been impossible either. No. I think so.
But she's very pragmatic, and obviously for Dunk, it's kind of a shock in the sense that he thinks, he thinks he's doing the right thing, fighting for Eustace. Then he finds out that, well, Eustace was on the wrong side of the war. He kind of sort of was a traitor. And then he tries to come up with a solution for Rohane. And then another solution, well, I mean, he goes through with his part, but then another part of the solution materializes while he's knocked out. And I think it's a bit of a lesson for Dunk.
Yeah, these are complicated.
But
I mean, Rohane indicated she was interested in Dunk. Obviously, he's a big,
yes, and Dunk quite clearly was interested
given those filthy dreams. Yes,
yes, he was dreaming not only of Rohane, he was dreaming of Rohane and Tansely at the same time.
Yeah, he was a little. He's young and full of hormones.
Yes, and Rohane naked with a bow and
yeah. So I mean, they kiss, and he refuses the gift of a horse. And instead takes a piece of her braid. The other thing, of course, is Bennis. While all this is going on at Walt's Wood, he beats up the steward, and his wife ties him up and steals everything he can grab and takes off. So that's
much for him.
So much for him. There's poetically, I mean, in literary terms, it sounds like they ought to run into him again at some point in time. Because they kind of want to. I mean, Dunk would like to.
Yeah, I think that the idea of bringing up characters, we said we think that it's likely that maybe Rohane's disappearance will somehow be mentioned at least in a future story. Because obviously, Eustace being much older than her goes and dies at some point. What happens to Coldmoat and what happens to Standfast?
Well, we have Osgrey. We know nothing about what happened to the Osgrey. Whether.
Did she have children with Eustace that were then left behind as heirs when she went and married?
Well, we have a Webber in the Dance of Dragons in the Golden Company who claims, and he even has the spider tattooed on himself or something, and he's in exile, and they're all another one claiming lost lands. And is he a descendant? Is he a descendant of one of the cousins? We don't know really what's become of them. Be interesting to find out. And it finishes with Dunk saying, and you're right, I double checked. Sorry, I mean they don't actually talk about the Stark situation as in the Mystery Night, but they do. But Dunk did think about the fact that when he was an orphan, I mean, he didn't really know who his father was, and someone once told him he was sent off to the Wall. So when it finishes, and Egg has expressed interest in seeing the Wall, and he himself decides that maybe they should go off to the Wall, and that's where we last see him heading north.
So, I mean, I don't know if all of the stories will be chronological. Do you think so?
Well, so far, because the Mystery Night takes place before
Yes, but...
it's a detour, basically.
True, but, for example, the Dorne visit, but I guess he won't be revisiting.
I don't think he'll revisit. Probably. I think he'll...
I think whether the Wall episode could then be a flashback of some kind following other stories.
I think it's definitely possible, but George's idea is that there'll be incidents that will be in the past of stories. He'll skip certain instances. So it's possible that the story after the Mystery Night, which George already started working on about Winterfell in the north, it could take place before Dunk gets to the Wall. It could be that after that story, Dunk doesn't want to go to the Wall. Or it could be that it happened after Dunk went to the Wall and was on his way back. We don't really know exactly. But that's, I think, our fourth segment is kind of discussed, like, what do we know was going to happen after. But the next video will be about the Mystery Night, which is the last published Duncan and Egg story. until then, hopefully it won't take quite so long again. Breeze is a
Breeze,
very...
depending. He's a demanding fellow, and I think we saw somebody on the comments who wanted to see our little animal. But first of all, it's not a little animal; it's a very large boxer who is very rambunctious, and he does occasionally sit in these chairs. But if we bring out the camera, he's going to immediately find something else to do. And
yeah. So, anyways, until the next video.